Good morning. I'm Pastor Mike Brink from Park Avenue Baptist Church, and I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this time with us. We at Park Ave want to be of help to you, so if you have a prayer request or want to chat about today's sermon, fill out the connection card in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being with us, and we hope you enjoy today's service.
I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, always free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am.
Hi everybody, Pastor Mike here. Just wanted to talk you through what to expect when you return to church for Sunday morning or Thursday evening services. When you arrive, we're going to ask you to participate with us in our masks on the move policy. Basically, if you're moving, wear a mask. If you're seated, feel free to remove it. So we're asking you to put on your mask before you leave your vehicle. Why? Well, you'll be interacting with people soon, perhaps even before you enter the building. So we want you to be ready. And we're in a residential neighborhood, and we want our neighbors to see that the people who are coming to church are taking the guidelines seriously and are committed to protecting others. At the end of the day, this is an opportunity for us to set aside our own preferences to better love and serve those around us. There will be a greeter at the door in mask and gloves to greet you. We want to keep your visit as contactless as we can. Inside each entrance, we'll also have hand sanitizer readily available and encourage everyone to utilize it frequently. Much of the building will be closed off for safety reasons, so we'd ask you to stick to the foyers and sanctuary. And to keep the foyers from becoming crowded, we'd ask you to move on into the sanctuary and find a seat. When you get to the sanctuary, we'll have ushers who can help guide you to appropriate social distance seating. Once you get to your seat, feel free to take your mask off, but please mask up again if you need to move elsewhere. Also, we're aiming for a contactless service, so we'll ask you to refrain from handshakes and hugs. One difference you'll notice in the sanctuary is that we don't have the microphones on stage. Because of the health risk in spreading germs through singing, we will not have our worship team leading us in congregational singing for now. Music is so important to so many of us, and while we will definitely feel its absence, this is a necessary precaution for the time being. I look forward to standing here and seeing many of you out in our sanctuary. Again, our services will resume on Thursday, July 9th at 6:30 p.m. and on Sunday, July 12th at 11 a.m. These will be identical services, so we'd encourage you to come to the time that fits your schedule best. For now, we will not have Sunday school, coffee and snack, nursery and kids ministries, or congregational singing. At the close of service, we will ask you to put your mask back on, and we will dismiss row by row to accommodate physical distancing. We'd again ask you not to congregate in the sanctuary or foyers, but to move on outside to visit, weather permitting, for as long as you'd like. Again, we'd ask that you physically distance at 6 feet before removing your mask. If you can't maintain physical distance, please keep your mask in place. We want everyone who is attending to feel safe, and we want our neighborhood to be relieved when they see us protecting each other and them by complying with CDC recommendations. One last thing. We will be maintaining our online presence, so if you don't feel comfortable attending physically, you can view each week's sermon on Sunday morning or at your convenience later in the week. We will miss you, but we also support your personal decisions concerning your health and safety. And don't forget, this is not the church. It is a meeting place for us, and we are thankful. But we are the church, all of us who are surrendered to Jesus and are learning to obey him more and more. I look forward to having our church community together again. Thanks for listening, and reach out if you have questions for us. Good morning, Park Avenue Baptist Church. Hope you have had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. We are back this morning for part 5 of our series, starting at the end, our study in Ecclesiastes. This week, we are launching physical services, so if you're local, you can consider joining us Thursday night at 6:30 or Sunday morning at 11. Either way, our online presence will be continuing, so if you're benefiting from this, it's still going to be here. So wanted to let you know about that. As we get going, a little bit of review. Solomon, what has life taught you? And what he would answer based on the content of Ecclesiastes is that everything is meaningless, and grappled with finding meaning. He also grappled with finding control, and he recognized that you don't have a lot of control over your birth, don't have a lot of control over your death, and you have very little control in between. And we have to grapple with that reality. Last week, we talked about this big idea that a big pile with constant toil will always feel like less than a little scoop with peace. And how much you have isn't so much what makes the difference, it's the environment, the atmosphere, the attitude that you have chosen. And then I just want to review some of the points we've touched on prior to this. The idea that life is short and often disappointing, that life has rhythms and seasons, that God hates oppression, that drive, envy, and laziness are all potential hazards, the idea that you can't take it with you, and the idea that healthy relationships are essential. So we're going to move today into Ecclesiastes chapter 5. We're going to actually look at the end of the chapter before we look at the beginning of the chapter. So the end of the chapter actually repeats a number of ideas that we've already talked about. So I'm just going to read down through that section. We're going to highlight a couple of verses and then move back and spend the majority of our time in the first 7 verses of the chapter. So Ecclesiastes chapter 5, beginning in verse 8. Don't be surprised if you see a poor person being oppressed by the powerful, and if justice is being miscarried throughout the land. For every official is under orders from higher up, and matters of justice get lost in red tape and bureaucracy. Even the king milks the land for his own profit. Then we hit verses 10 and 11. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth will bring true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? And it's interesting that as much as things have changed from Solomon's day, there are some things that have not changed at all, and this would be one of them. We continue in verse 12. People who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much, but the rich seldom get a good night's sleep. There is another serious problem I've seen under the sun. Hoarding riches harms the saver. Money is put into risky investments that turn sour, and everything is lost. In the end, there is nothing left to pass on to one's children. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as on the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. And this too is a very serious problem. People leave this world no better off than when they came. All their hard work is for nothing, like working for the wind. Throughout their lives, they live under a cloud, frustrated, discouraged, and angry. Even so, I have noticed one thing at least that is good. It is good for people to eat, drink, and enjoy their work under the sun during the short time God has given them, and to accept their lot in life. And it is a good thing to receive wealth from God and the good health to enjoy it. To enjoy your work and accept your lot in life, this is indeed a gift from God. God keeps such people so busy enjoying life that they take no time to brood over the past. So some powerful lessons there. I just wanted to zero us in on a couple of those verses and a couple of those key ideas. They were too rich for us to pass up. Now we're going to jump back to those first 7 verses. And what's interesting here is that the end of chapter 5 is much in tone like the earlier parts of Ecclesiastes, but these first 7 verses are different in that Solomon moves from making observations to giving instruction, to telling us what we should do, what is expected of us. And that's kind of a turn from what has been his pattern up to this point. In these 7 verses, we learn a lot about what it means to listen to God and how we're supposed to talk to God. And that's the content of these 7 verses. But what is really interesting, I think, is that as we learn how to listen to God and how to talk to God, we also get some really helpful insights on how we should listen to others and how we should talk to others. This is especially pertinent for us in this cultural moment that we find ourselves in, because right now we are in information overload. We have so much information literally at our fingertips that we can't process a fraction of it, and we're turning away content and saying, no more. We live in a world of constant distraction and overstimulation. There's so much coming at us. There is no silence, no stillness, and no room for contemplation. We've crowded it out of our lives. In our culture, the highest priority is to make your voice heard, to make sure you speak out and you express how you're feeling. And when everyone is insisting on speaking, then fewer and fewer people are listening. Emotion has become king and trumps reason, and we just find that the loudest person wins. The one that makes the most noise gets the trophy. It's ironic because we are probably more connected now with other people than we've ever been in history, but at the same time, we are the most isolated from real relationships that we have ever been. So what Solomon has to share with us here is especially pertinent. We could even look at it this way, that chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes was about the worship of wealth and how that does not go well for us. Ecclesiastes 5 contrasts true worship and false worship with genuine faith with surface religiosity, and really helps us to gain some clarity there. So I want to look at the first couple verses there of chapter 5. It says, as you enter the house of God, keep your ears open and your mouth shut. It is evil to make mindless offerings to God. Don't make rash promises, and don't be hasty in bringing matters before God. After all, God is in heaven, and you are here on earth. So let your words be few. I appreciate in these verses the perspective. There's an incredible respect for God as being greater than us, larger than us, above us. And that's a very healthy perspective for us to have, and something that we have largely lost in our modern world. If we were to look at these two verses and say, okay, so Solomon's giving instructions, what does he instruct us to do? We could break out these 4 things. That he says, keep your ears open and your mouth shut. Pretty good advice right there, in not just in worship settings, but probably in all of life. He says, don't make rash promises. He says, don't be hasty in bringing matters before God. And he says, let your words be few. That better to say less that means more than to just babble on incessantly. There's also something really important for us to understand about the context of religion as Solomon was speaking to, and how different that is for us today. In the Old Testament, this was Old Testament Israel. Well, the temple was the center of worship for them. It was a physical location, and it was a grand physical location. High ceilings, open spaces. You came to the temple and you felt dwarfed by your surroundings. And it was an immediate reminder that I am small and God is big. So they would go to the temple, and that's the place they would go to have connection with God. But what we experience today is very different on this side of the cross, because the New Testament church, the believer is the center of worship. Worship can take place wherever I am, because the Holy Spirit is within me. So where in the temple, that's the place where God was. Now we are the places where the Holy Spirit lives. Talk about portability. It's an amazing thing, and it affects the way we look at worship. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 6, he said, don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourselves, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. And that is not an idea that is popular or that we are comfortable with. The idea that you do not belong to yourself. Because our culture says, you have to make you happy, because if you don't make you happy, who will? Looking out for number one, be the top dog, climb to the top, step on whoever you need to. And the message of the gospel is very counter to that, because you do not belong to yourself, because God bought you with a high price. And when we recognize that, it changes our attitude and changes the rights that we will try to assert. I want to unpack a couple of ideas for us quickly, and then we will move forward in the passage. I need to remember that my life is not my own. I need to remember that I never leave God behind. Wherever I go, He is with me. I need to remember that I never tell God something He didn't already know, but He still wants to hear from me. Because it's not about Him getting information, it's about us building relationship. I need to remember that I've never had a conversation that God isn't part of. He is a witness to every conversation that I have. Every face-to-face interaction, every phone call, every internet chat, my God sees. That's sobering for us. And I need to remember that people decide what God is like largely based on what His followers are like. So if we are highly critical, mean-spirited, judgmental people, then people are going to decide that must be what God is like if that's what His people are like. So, some recommendations for us. We need to get reacquainted with silence and stillness. It will not find its way into your life. You will need to build it into your life. You'll need to be deliberate about that. Also, a good idea for us to stop talking so much and start listening more. And that runs counter to our sense of self-importance. Well, I have things that people need to hear. Maybe not. Believe that you have more to learn than you have to impart. Sometimes rather than insisting on, I must be heard, we need to say, I must listen. I must learn from others. They have valuable things to teach me. And what you say and how you live should tell the same story. Those two things should be consistent with one another, not at odds, not in conflict with one another. You see, I think we get this idea that God listens like this, like we're in a microphone talking to Him, and He has His headphones on, and He's just waiting to hear what we have to say. And I think that's true to a point, but probably a much better analogy for us to use is this, that God listening to us is more like a stethoscope than a microphone, because our words reveal our heart to Him. And He is not so much listening to our words to get information. He already has all of that. He is listening to our words because they reveal what our priorities are. Just like a doctor would listen to someone's heart with a stethoscope, and it would help that doctor to know what kind of treatment they needed, God listens to our hearts, and it helps Him to see where we are sick and where we need healing. It's a powerful reminder for us. Verse 3. Too much activity gives you restless dreams. Too many words make you a fool. Very simple idea there. Too many words make you a fool. Solomon also wrote in Proverbs and touched on the idea of our words time and time again. This is probably one of the most poignant of his expressions in Proverbs 17:28. Even fools are thought wise when they keep silent. With their mouths shut, they seem intelligent. Ouch. That's a painful reminder for us that sometimes we give ourselves away when we insist on opening our mouth and we just give evidence to our ignorance. There's another problem that we run up against, and that's making promises. How many times have you been guilty of this? Saying, God, if you will just get me out of this situation, if you would just allow me to survive, if you would just allow me not to get caught, if you would just allow this relationship to be restored, if you would just provide another job, then I promise that I'll go to church every Sunday. I'll stop living like this. I'll stop making these choices. I'll be a better person. I'll read my Bible every day. And the problem is, first, our God is not a bartering God. He has all of the resources. We come with empty hands. We have nothing to barter with. But more than that, we need to know the content of our own hearts. How often have you made a promise like that and then you didn't follow through? Because once the crisis is averted, then you feel like, well, in the heat of the moment, I said that, but that's not really realistic that I'm going to go to church every Sunday for the rest of my life. God knows that it's not fair to hold me to that. And Solomon talks about some of those things here, beginning in verse 4. He says, when you make a promise to God, don't delay in following through, for God takes no pleasure in fools. Keep all the promises you make to him. It is better to say nothing than to make a promise and not keep it. Don't let your mouth make you sin. And don't defend yourself by telling the temple messenger that the promise you made was a mistake. That would make God angry, and he might wipe out everything you have accomplished. These are hard words that Solomon is giving to the people of Israel, and we are often not used to a God of consequence. We think of our God, oh, he's a God of grace and love and forgiveness and mercy, and he is. But he is a God of justice. And when we lie to him, and that's what we're doing when we make a promise and then don't keep it, we're saying, I promise this, and your word is worthless. It's devalued every time you make a promise and don't follow through. Verse 7, talk is cheap, like daydreams and other useless activities. Fear God instead. When we develop a reverence, a respect for God, because he is powerful, because he is in control and we are not, it puts us in a frame of mind to communicate with him better. Because we're not going to think of him as my buddy. We're not going to think of him as the man upstairs. We're going to go, that's the God of the universe who loves me and is making time for me. Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 5 some things that tie right in here. He said, you have also heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. But I say, do not make any vows. Do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. And then down in verse 37, just say a simple, yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. Wow. Powerful words for us to grapple with. And I want to remind us at this point, before we move forward, if you're feeling at all beat up, if you're feeling like, well, yeah, I've broken promises to God, is he mad at me? I would also say, we're living on this side of the cross where Christ is doing a redemptive work in us, and sometimes really messy. I think The bigger thing for us to focus on is to take our promises seriously, to not make them flippantly, and to go, there are consequences when I break my word, whether that's to God or to people. So, big idea for today, your words matter to God. Your words reveal your heart, both to God and to people. God knows what you're about by the way you talk to him, and people know what you're really about by the way you talk to them, or maybe the things that they overhear that we would hope they didn't notice because they're really a poor testimony from us. So we started out today and talked about that Ecclesiastes 4 was about wealth, Ecclesiastes 5 is about worship, and it's about our words. It's about what comes together there. And we need to recognize that we have a God who is out to help us and desires that we would be transformed. David Gibson uses a quote in his book, Living Backwards. He says this, one God, the real God, the living God, commands love of him and love of my neighbor. The other gods, wealth, success, achievement, advancement, command trampling my neighbor to get what I want. No man can serve two masters. We have to decide who are we going to serve and then take appropriate action. That's not easy. We need help. We will not do that by sheer force of will. We will do that incrementally by surrendering to Jesus Christ. Before we close, I just want to give you two pieces of application. You'll think the first one is tough until we get to the second one. So, application number 1, make a deliberate effort this week to listen more and talk less. Ouch. That's especially convicting for a pastor who makes his living talking. And I'm challenged in this area of God, how can I be a better listener for people? And then secondly, resolve to be a truth teller. The person you're talking to may never know the truth from a lie. They may never know that you're deceiving them. But your ever-present God knows what is true. You're not fooling him. And sometimes I think because God doesn't hit us with a lightning bolt or open up the earth to swallow us up, that, well, he must not care, or he didn't hear, and I'm going to get away with it. But the consequences roll in. And by the time you're feeling those consequences, the damage is already done. You don't get the opportunity then to undo it. So, Ecclesiastes 5, first 7 verses, talks about listening to God and talking to God, but it really gives us a lot of insight into how we talk to others and how we listen to others. Well, I want to thank you for listening so well to me, and I hope you have a great week.